We are really grateful today to have Bob Kipp here, who's the president of the Common Ground Alliance, and I'm trying to find his thing, which should be right here. And we were going to have him talk tomorrow, but Bob has the unenviable task of having to run around to all these NASCAR races and host NASCAR people because he's the master of getting the 811 logo on all kinds of really interesting stuff, and I'm sure he's going to talk about that a little bit. But we'll let him start off. Mr. Kipp.
Thanks, Carl. My pleasure. Before I even start, tell you where I'm from. When they told me they were going to put the 811 logo on a vehicle going round and round, I thought it was a Zamboni. I just didn't understand NASCAR. I'm starting to learn all about it. So that was pretty interesting. Secondly, I'm here to talk about excavation damage to all infrastructure. The Common Ground Alliance, to give you a bit of a background, was created in 2001, and with some of the incidences that occurred in the 90s, and including what happened in Bellingham and other locations, as the pipeline industry goes for reauthorization every 4 years, in 1998, when they went for reauthorization, they came out with, I believe it was TEA 21, and part of that was a recommendation that all industry experts from across the country get together and come out with a group of best practices, things that were being done in some states that would work better elsewhere. I heard a question asked to that effect earlier. So they got together in 1998, and it took about a year to come up with the study on best practices. Many of these people, by the way, really disliked each other. They only ever faced each other in front of courtroom. And so it was difficult for them to get together and come up with some of these best practices. And that's why it took a year. Some of these same people today are the best of friends, because it was to find how do we do things better for the good of all, and how do we do that? The best practices are not necessarily the best practices. They are the best practices everybody could agree to. The best practices that we could all live with, and you'll hear that term quite frequently in the study of, or in the discussions of best practices. That slide is a bit cut off, it's a big slide anyways. We talk about 2.5 million miles in pipeline. Well, there's about 20 million, just over 19 million miles of infrastructure in the U.S. Cable, television, gas, electric, liquids, you name it, nearly 20 million miles, just an incredible amount of infrastructure when you think about it. And that's what we're trying to avoid hitting from day to day when you're doing work. And who's the CGA? Well, we represent all the stakeholders, and the names don't really matter much there in terms of who specifically they are, but if you look at who they represent, that's our board of directors. And virtually every one of these people is very influential in their industry. They may be owner-operators, they may be presidents, but they typically also belong to their associations, the national ones. Randy Bernard of Williams, as you know, President Williams Corporation also belongs to Inc., of course. Our chair this year, Vic Weston, is not only a road builder in Louisiana, Texas, but he is the treasurer of the Associated General Contractors of America. Jim Barron owns his own construction company, utility construction company, and he is the incoming president of the National Utility Contractors Association. So all of these people are very influential in the industry. So when they make a decision or when they speak to the industry, they're representing the industry, which is very critical. We have committees, and you can see the committees there. One Call Systems is one of the committees. Technology, formerly R&D, Regional Partners, Data, Education, and Best Practices. I will skip through some of these slides as I get to them, because when I prepared them, I wasn't sure of the audience, and now that I've got a feel for what you're interested in, I hopefully will get to some of those issues. Best practices. That's the number one issue, and this is version 9.0. We haven't gotten it up there. It just was released last week. These are the practices that really involve two or more stakeholder groups. We're not going to talk about how we're going to manage the corrosion in pipeline. That's not up to us. Those best practices are an industry practice for the pipeline industry. We're not going to tell excavators how to operate a backhoe. That's up to them. But when it involves calling the one call center, marking lines, digging effectively and safely, et cetera, that's what these practices allude to. They also allude to compliance and enforcement, and I heard that bandied around more this afternoon than I did a little earlier. But compliance and enforcement has been part of the best practices since 1999. And I think we're going to see more of it with the reauthorization that came out and signed in January. I think there are a couple of things in there about removing exemptions to state one-call laws, and I think they also refer to reducing grants. And as my old man used to say, follow the money, son, follow the money, and you get your answer. So I think you're going to see some laws change. We're already getting wind of some states looking at their one-call laws. There are a number of great one-call laws across the country, and there are a number that, in my estimation, are not so great, that may or may not help one industry group over another. And that may have to do with whose brother-in-law was in the legislature at the time the laws were passed. I'm not sure how we get to some of these rules and regulations or laws, but there are some that are really good. I heard earlier about how do you examine, what do you investigate, and of course every state is different, and certain laws will work better in some states than in others. But one that's been very effective, and they had to get effective because of all the construction and the population activity going on around there, was in Virginia. And in the 90s, they created a series of fairly stringent one-call laws, and the one biggest piece to it was that every single incident affecting a pipeline, whether it be distribution or transmission, if there was an incident, every one of them would be investigated. And they hold a meeting once a month, a public hearing, and they have a board, and on the board they're all volunteers and all agreed to, but there are owner-operators, there are contractors, locators, state representative, etc. And the investigators go out and investigate the law, come back, or the infraction, come back and recommend a fine, and the fine ranges from $500 to $2,500. That's it. Or it may be a letter. Or it may be, we'll have to go and educate this company because they're new and they don't know how it works, so we'll go and teach their people how to do things. It seems to work well. Their damages are way down, and for an area with still a fair amount of activity, population, etc., their damages are down around the 1.6 damages per 1,000 tickets. And for those of you who are familiar with that measurement in the industry, that is a darn good number. So that's one of the places that is being used a bit as a model. I won't say what state, but I just received one state that maybe does not have effective enforcement laws, that they've recommended anything to do with what's going on in Virginia to see if they can look at how it might work in their state. These, by the way, these practices, some of them have been adopted in state law in whole or in part. Those of you familiar with Walnut Creek in 2004, where 5 welders were killed relative to a liquid pipeline and a water main going in. The investigation was held in California, and a number of issues came of it, but one of them certainly was that the locating standards were not good. And what they've done in California state law is they've basically said that common ground best practices related to locating are now the law in California. So as our excavating or locating practices change, the law does change. So that's how they keep par with it, or keep up to date with it. In Georgia, the one-call law refers to the statutes to the Public Utility Services Commission, who then says that in the PUSC rules and regulations, all current common ground best practices are rule and regulation in Georgia. And so as we change our practices, they become, in effect, a rule or regulation in Georgia. The process is long. A best practice can be recommended by anyone. It can come from anywhere, as long as it is in effect in at least one state. They can recommend a best practice change or adoption. Then it goes to committee. If they view that it affects 2 or more and that it's worth looking at, then a task team is appointed and off they go. And by the end of the investigation of whether or not it should be a best practice, typically is a year, 2 years. I saw one actually take 10 years to pass. It was very difficult, but eventually passed. And It was difficult to get one group to want to be able to say, I can live with that, and finally that group came through and said yes. So when we bandy around these best practices, rest assured that every single major association in the United States has agreed with each and every word. That doesn't mean each and every company agrees with it, but their association they belong to agree to it. Very difficult process, but when you're in here, it's pretty darn good, and it's a pretty good standard to go from. And you can see 7 new last year. Dirt report, that's the next one I'll jump to very quickly. We publish a damage information reporting tool. We started to do that in 2004, and it's by no means perfect. Goodness, it's all volunteer. It's very, very confidential. No one knows who provides us with these reports except 4 people, and I'll show you results from certain companies who've allowed me to say, yes, you can show our results. But basically, it started in 2004, and we're evolving. Initially, we wanted as much information as we could, but we were getting very little, and that was okay. Get people to give us whatever we can get, and then we'll go after them and try and get more. You know, it's pretty much a bait and switch or bait and sell or whatever you want to call it. And it's working. And now we publish what we call a data quality index. And we send it to the company and say, geez, thanks for all your reports. By the way, you're an 82, and we'd like you to be a 96. So, you know, get better at some of these numbers. And of course, the reason being very simple. The more we know, the better action we can take to prevent damages. It's for the good of the industry. Goodness, when I sit there with some executives of various stakeholder groups, and I have to convince them of that, and they say, well, our lawyers say not to give it to us. And I say, we've had 500,000 reports over the years. We've never been subpoenaed. If you do anything wrong, don't worry about them coming to me. Worry them about going to you. You're the one they're going after. They're not coming to us to get the report. Darn it, give us the damages. And we guarantee the confidentiality, and the more we know, the better off you are. Carl talks about when he testifies. The same with us. When I testify some of the same things in Congress, they want to know numbers. It's no longer good enough for me to just go up and say, you know, about 50% of the damages were caused because people didn't call before digging. Goodness, if a congressman had tested me on that, I was a dead duck. You know, I'd have to say, well, you know, I talked to Pete, and I talked to Jim, and I talked to Sue, and that's what they tell me, so, you know, it's got to be true. Now we've got some data that we can sort of back up and quantify and say, this is what we're seeing, this is how it's going, this is what we need to do. So it's good for the industry. If any of your companies out there aren't providing us with damage data, they should. Just heard last week, oh gosh, if I say the name of the company, I can't even say the name of the company, but there's a big company that's going to provide us with a ton of damage data, probably more than any other industry or any other company around. So that's all good news. Online, I won't get through all of that. It's all done easily. This is the highlights from last year's report. Less than 1% of excavations received. That is so critical. That basically is saying, if you call 811, if you call Gary and his people, whether you're putting in a deck, whether you're putting in a sidewalk, building a house, doesn't matter what, you're putting in a fence, that we'll talk in a sec. If you call 811, 99% of the time, it will go off without a hitch. Over 99% of the time, there will be no damage. That is so critical. It is such a good industry. The people are so good at what they're doing and what they do that you can say 99% of the time nothing goes wrong. So quite critical. 1/3 result failure to make notification prior to excavation. That's a good number. It's much better than the approximately 50% we testified in front of Congress with in 2002. And on a real number basis, we're down from about 200,000 damages we estimate in 2004 where people hadn't called to about 52,000 damages where people didn't call in 2010. We're now putting together 2011 numbers. So those are really good numbers. Call, call, call. That is the key thing. There's no reason not to call. It's free. Do it. And then we went into following those questions, and there you've got sort of a big pie chart that says back to that 32% notification not made. Excavation practice not sufficient, 38. and locating practices not sufficient. So improperly marked or not marked. On the excavation side, call but didn't obey the marks, didn't hand dig when they should have hand dug, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of categories within those that we're going after. This is a real critical one. Like was stated earlier, I forget who mentioned it, but we're not after all the excavators. The vast majority of excavators are professional. My goodness, their insurance rates are so high, you wouldn't believe what they pay. And if they botch up one of these things and cause a damage and lose their insurance, they're out of business. I mean, it can be that quick for some of them. Others, it may take a couple. So they're very, very aware of what they have to do. It's the small folks, it's the DIYers, it's the folks that rent these 14,000 backhoes that United Rental rent, and thank God they're on our side and put the 811 logo everywhere. These are the folks that are causing issues. A lot of the cases because they don't know or don't think or my goodness, I know what's in my backyard. Yeah, maybe not. And that's one of the issues. Fencing folks, a lot of mom and pop operators in that environment. And really on a local basis, you've got to do some work to get to the fencing people building fences, to make them the call. Goodness, you all know where all the phone lines and electric lines and cable lines and internet lines are. They're on your lot line. Where do you put a fence post? Duh. On the lot line. That's where you're digging. That's where you're going to hit them. So it's really critical we get to these folks. Oh, I just as an aside, big mistake to put me first. As an aside, in Houston, after Ike hit, I get a call from Joe Barry at Centerpoint Energy, and he says, and this was about 10 days after the hurricane hit, and he said, Bob, the people are coming back. And he says, in Houston, all of our gas distribution is on the back lot line. That's how we've done it in Texas. And he says, the phone's ringing off the hook. The people are hitting their lines everywhere. He said, I guess they took care of their house first, had to do what they had to do. Now they're getting to their fences, and everybody in Texas got a fence, every subdivision, and they're just digging like crazy. So we got Texas 811 together with what we were doing. We got some 811 signs put up, banners made up, put them on in all the Lowe's and Home Depots in Houston, and the calls just went, whew. Not to 811, the calls to the gas company that people were hitting lines. So 811 does help, and those are the kinds of things we've got to do. Yeah, that's more of an interesting slide for the industry, but all to say, we had about 450,000 damages we estimate in 2004. The last 2 years, excluding 11, 9 and 10, we're at about 165,000. We got the low-hanging fruit. We now have to really get detailed information to go for the rest. 165,000 is way too many, but we still have a lot of work to do, and now it's going to be hard work to get to the rest of it. This is an interesting stat. You don't see the 450 because it starts at 2005, but it was about 450 in 2004. Then you can see the damages go down. The estimated one-call tickets, which is that yellow line, they were starting to come down, or estimated one-call tickets per 100 damages, and you can see the green line is the building permits. So the economy went down. The tickets didn't go down as much because we introduced 811 in 2007. So that caused that line to sort of level out a little bit, and you can see our events reported to dirt. It dropped in 2009 because I think we got fewer damages, and now it's starting to level off. So in total, we've done a good job as an industry bringing the number of damages down, but we're sort of leveling off, and we've got to do something now and get folks working to get that number down more. PGE out of Portland, I think it's Portland Gas or Portland General Electric, I forget what the name. Pacific, but it's the city one.
Oh, it's Portland General.
Portland General Electric, yes. And what you can see there is they had total dig-ins were in the 250 range, which is the red line. They were about 250 in 2005, about the same in 6 and 2007, and then whoops, and the locate requests, by the way, you could see were just starting to come down, and then 811 was introduced, just about where the lines intersect. And when 811 was introduced, some people embraced it, some of them didn't as much. They did. They really embraced 811. They really started to use it. So even though the economy was dipping, the number of requests, which cost them money, was going up, but the number of damages were coming way down. So now they're down into about the 69, 70 damage level from about 250. So that's the 811 effect in Portland of using it and making sure people knew it. Here's Washington Gas. And you can see there the damages per 1,000 locates, how they're coming down. And they're down in the under 1 category range, Washington Gas in the Virginia area. Just a tremendous, tremendous feat. They've got a lot of tickets. It's still a very active area. They're affected, obviously, by the Virginia laws, and they're quite proud of their achievement to get those numbers down, and well, they should be. They've got some really interesting low damage numbers for the area that they're in. For any area, let alone the area they're in. August 11th, we'll talk a little bit about NASCAR. One of the things we've got to do, we don't have a big budget, we've got to keep promoting 811, and we ask companies to do that, and they do it, which is great. We heard this morning about Questar and their account inserts. 3M, which is is a member of ours, and you say, well, what do they? Well, they sell pipe. But more than that, they don't like the idea of damages either. And so, interestingly enough, and you can only see it on the front there, if you look closely, the front, the hood, and the back, they call that the deck lid, I've been told. They put that on a couple of races per year for us for free. Shell Pipeline do the same. They've done it, or they're doing it for 4 races in April and the Homestead race. This week, Greg Biffle, who drives this car, was on Speed Radio. For those of you who know Speed Radio, I thought that was some sort of doctor show, but no, apparently that's a NASCAR thing. And he was on this week, and just great stuff. And Richard Hendrick, Hendrick Motors. He was on for his cars last year, and Hendrick said, he said, now, for those of you who know NASCAR, I've found out, the driver can see nothing beside him. He sees what's in front of him, and he sees what's behind him. Everything else, when you see these guys going 220 miles an hour, and there's a car there, they don't know the car's there if it wasn't for the spotter. And I've listened in on some of the races, and you hear the spotter say, on your right, moving up, your fender, on your right, on your left, backing off on your right, clear on your right, on your left, clear. Then nothing. When he's clear, they say nothing. So he's clear, and that means he's good to go. So Hendrick is on Speed Radio, and he says, you know, this 811 thing, it's just like racing cars. He says, you're going to go dig in your backyard. You have no idea what's underground. He says, call your spotter, 811. And that spotter will come out and mark the lines for you. Cool stuff. Cool stuff. So this is really neat. And when you look at the value of it, what Shell did for us, and the way they measure this is they call those media impressions. The amount of time it's on TV, and boy, you'd be amazed at the population of people who watch these races. The amount of time it's on TV for the races in April of last year, National Safe Digging Month, the amount of time, the audience, Hendrick, the radio shows, we got $6,700,000 worth of free advertising from Shell. That's what the value was. So that's really neat stuff, and 3M is doing the race this weekend in Bristol, and that's why I'm going there, to thank them very much for all that good stuff. So there we go. There he's got his 811 hat. That was on ESPN, and he was interviewed for quite some time with the 811 hat on. So it gets people to know a little more about what we're doing. More than just a day in 2011, we talked Biffle. August 11th, we do a lot of stuff. 811 visits. I'm going to skip because I'm taking more time than I should. But we do think about doing baseball things in August here. If you've got an A team or AA or AAA, they're always looking for ads. Radio shows. If you have a small radio talk show, bring him an 811 cake and wait outside. And if he doesn't have any other guests on, he's going to say, come here, let's talk about this thing. That happened in at least 7 or 8 different markets we were in. So all of these things work. This was Pennsylvania one called, now, Today Show. I don't know if you watch that here. It's a big thing on the East Coast. The Today Show, we go and the people from, that was worth $350,000. Most of these people are from New York Dig Safe or from National Grid, the gas company there. And they get together at about 4 in the morning at the hotel. We give them T-shirts. and they go and man the barricade lines. And so when they come out at 8 o'clock to do interviews or to talk to some of the people, you see all these 811 shirts, and if you're lucky, you get interviewed and you get some media. So that's what we're doing, and that's the media impressions in 2011. You see we keep growing, all sorts of ways of doing it locally, things they've done in Texas. They have a lot of big companies there, so they're able to put together an ad campaign which worked out. This is just some of the stuff you can see at some of the local baseball. There's 811 at one of the parks. Call 811 New York. So that was another park. Now that's me, and it was low and inside. Now that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It hit the dirt. What can I tell you? I could have, if it was a slap shot, I could have put it in his glove in a second. But no, they had to give me a baseball. And that's another stadium again, and you get some really good media advertising with it. Different companies had that day, CenterPoint Energy, others. We made shirts available at $5 a piece, and I think we sold 25,000 to the various companies who wanted their employees to have them. And back to the cakes I talked about. Marco's Pizza, a small company, 16 states, but mostly in the Ohio, Michigan area. Deal with the same people we do, so they talked to them and they said, okay, on 8/11 day and on every Monday in April, National Safe Digging Month, they sold a large topping for $8.11 instead of, I think their normal price is $10. And they had the logo on it and they advertised it, so all good stuff. Some of the tanks that get painted, that looks like a Shell one. Shell have painted a number of tanks, typically along interstates where there's a lot of traffic. The first one to do it was Colonial Pipeline near I-85 in Greensboro. Sunoco's done it on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Williams, I think, has got one painted. I think it's Williams on 95 near New York. Williams have got another sign outside their office with the 811 painted. So there's a lot of good things going on, and I think Questar may have one. I'm not sure. Not yet? Well, it's coming. After today, maybe. So that's what we're looking at. We've got an ad campaign or a communications plan on our website with the whole year there and things we recommend that you do. Have a look and see what you're doing. You may get ideas. The only thing we ask is if you do something different, let us know so we can spread the word to others. We really want to try and get more and more people calling 811 before they dig, because as I just mentioned, if you do 99% of the time, nothing goes wrong. And I think, that one. Yeah, we decided to get a couple of videos out, and it's one video with 3 different 8-minute segments on. The first one was the middle one, Call 811 for Kids. And it's been shown in a number of schools, boys' clubs, scouts, guides, etc., targeting 8 to 11-year-olds, and that's quite frankly a coincidence, 8/11. And it's a pirate story, and it goes about 8 minutes. And from the parents I've talked to whose kids have seen it, it's great. And I will, again, I'm taking too much time, but I will draw on a personal thing. When I was a young boy in in the 1950s, my dad had this big, maybe it was 1960, because he had a 1959 Chevy Impala with the big wings. And I remember my dad used to smoke a lot, and he'd fling them out the window. And I'd see the ads, only you can prevent a forest fire, from Smokey the Bear. And I used to tell my dad, Dad, you're going to cause a forest fire. And he stopped. He stopped throwing the cigarettes out because I was a pain in the butt. But when you think about it, when you think about today, kids, everything is wireless. I mean, wireless TV, wireless phones. They have no idea that there's massive infrastructure underground. And if you get to them at a young age, they will annoy you. They will annoy you until you stop doing bad behavior. That's what kids are for, I swear. So that's one of the videos, and I really suggest that if you can get it to your classrooms, the grade 4s, 5s, 6s in that range, 7, whatever, they really do pay attention to it. The other one is 5 steps to safer digging up at the top for novices, where we've got people color-coded by the type of infrastructure. And then the one at the bottom, it's for the professional contractor, and it's been approved by AGC and NUCA. That was not last week's annual meeting, but the year before. That's Joey Logano, a race car driver, and he showed up with his satin suit, but instead of Home Depot, it said 811. Oh, what a kid. 22 years old. Goodness, was he good. He was really good. Answered all sorts of questions. This year, we had these guys. We had Joey Jr., Joey Sr., Paul Jr., Paul Jr., Paul, of course, Paul. Joey, why do I think of Joey? I think of my nephew. American Chopper, and they showed it on the 2 last episodes in February. They started it in the one on the Monday with the Trump bike. I think Trump was dad, and Joey or Paul Jr. was building. I got Joey on my brain now. And then Paul finished it in the second episode in February, and of course it's going to be replayed over and over. 5 million people watched that show. And every time they interviewed Paul Jr. while he's building the bike, you got the big 811 banner. You talk about our target audience, males 19 to 49. Bingo. I mean, that's who's digging. That's who's digging. And we had that at our annual meeting, and Paul said a few words, and he was great, answered a bunch of questions. The bike is now on tour. I think anybody who wants it, they have to have somebody with it, so you got to pay the person and the shipping, and that's sort of it. But if you have any big event going on, and if you can, because I think this thing is pretty solidly booked. It's got backhoe shovels of spokes. It's got, right here, you can see there's a plain old shovel right in the middle of it. I mean, the whole thing was beautifully designed. It was paid for by one of the One Call Center owners. There's some private companies that run some of the One Call Centers in the U.S., and he's a big fan of biking, so he wanted to do that, and it's just been a great success. You know, we don't survive without these folks. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a great organization from the standpoint that we've got both government and the industry working together. And I remember a couple of years ago when Vice Admiral Barrett was administrator, and he invited me to a couple of other things he was involved with to tell them how we did the CGA and how they might want to look and see what they were doing. But these are the companies that make us go, and the membership-wise and sponsorship, and not only from a money, but from typically a participation standpoint. You know, these committee meetings, they're held all over the country. People have to show up. They have to give up their time. They have to get involved. They have to commit. And it's great to see that these companies are supporting us through and through. And it's not just oil and gas companies. You'll see the planes there, of course. They're represented here tonight. You've got Aegis, an insurance company. Got the Association of American Railroads, AGC, Cortera, which is a computer company. Of course, Inga, and you can see some of the others, ExxonMobil, Explorer, Coke, NiSource, and NAPSR, and National Association of State Fire Marshals, PSE&G, Verizon, which is, by the way, bumping up to a silver sponsor this year, Texas 811, Southwest Gas, Travelers Insurance Company, and the bottom one there on the right is Ocinerman, which is the Peruvian FERC. And they pay for Chris Ann to go down once a year, and she does the whole thing with them, and they bring in industry people from all over. They've translated our best practices to Spanish, and they want to be the first ones to have a one-call center in South America. So it seems to be working. The message is getting out, and I'm way over my time. And thank you very much.